By the time Jackson Reed turned 52, he had no idea just how much his quiet confidence and life-earned wisdom had transformed him into someone people naturally gravitated toward. He wasn't flashy, didn't chase trends, and wasn't on social media flashing his lifestyle. But something changed in the way people looked at him, particularly women, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. It all began at his friend Scott's retirement party in downtown Chicago. The restaurant was warm, buzzing with conversation and clinking glasses. Jackson had only come to support Scott, an old friend from their Navy days. But the moment he stepped through the door, people seemed to notice him. A younger woman, perhaps in her early 30s, looked up from the bar and smiled. A few minutes later, the waiter asked if Jackson was an actor or author. He chuckled it off, thinking it was nothing more than the gray streak in his hair and the leather jacket he'd thrown on. Scott noticed it too. "You've got that vibe, Jack," he said, handing him a glass of bourbon. "That no-nonsense, calm energy. You didn't have that at 30. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "What kind of vibe?" Scott smirked. "You look like you know exactly who you are, and that's rare. Women see it. Men respect it. That's power." Over the weeks that followed, Jackson began observing how others reacted to him. His neighbor's daughter Olivia, who used to keep things brief with a nod, now lingered for conversations about travel, cooking, and career struggles. At his gym, people twice his junior asked him for tips on form and life. It wasn't just that he was in shape, it was the way he carried himself. Solid, steady, without needing to prove anything. Jackson's transformation wasn't about vanity or chasing youth. It was about owning his presence. A few days later, he met Rachel. They crossed paths at a bookstore where Jackson spent Saturday mornings browsing biographies and classic novels. Rachel was thumbing through a psychology book when Jackson accidentally knocked a book off the shelf. They laughed, exchanged book recommendations, and ended up talking for nearly an hour before she offered her number. Rachel was 38, successful, grounded, and very clear in her intentions. What surprised Jackson most was how openly she admired his age. "You have this calmness about you," she told him over dinner. "Like you've lived enough to know what matters and what doesn't. That's attractive. You're not trying to impress anyone." Jackson, who had spent the better part of his life focused on building his architecture firm, raising his daughter after his divorce, and staying grounded, never saw himself as particularly captivating. But now, as he stood in front of a mirror one morning, he began to see what others saw. His salt and pepper beard wasn't a flaw, it was distinction. His slow, intentional way of speaking was a signal of someone who thought before reacting. He had clarity, and it showed. One evening, his daughter Emily, now 24 and just starting her own adult life, came over for dinner. As they ate, she teased him. "Dad, did you know my friends all think you look like the cool older guy from a Netflix show? The one with the motorcycle." He laughed. "Should I start auditioning?" "No," she smiled. "But I think they're onto something. You've got this quiet charisma. You don't say much, but when you do, everyone listens." He'd never thought about it like that. He wasn't trying to win people over. He was simply being himself. That shift, from trying to impress to just being, was the difference between youthful charm and mature appeal. The more he leaned into who he truly was, the more magnetic he became. He didn't need to wear designer clothes. His usual jeans, boots, and leather jacket were enough. What mattered more was the way he moved through life, with confidence, purpose, and a touch of grace. Rachel introduced him to her friends a month into their relationship. They were successful, intelligent women, and yet, Jackson noticed how the room naturally turned toward him when he spoke. He didn't dominate conversations but listened attentively, offered thoughtful perspectives, and always carried himself with quiet certainty. Later, Rachel pulled him aside and said, "You have no idea how many of my friends asked if you were single before they knew we were together." Jackson smiled. "That's flattering." "It's more than flattery," she replied. "You're the kind of man people trust immediately." One day, after a charity gala Rachel invited him to, he ran into an old college friend, Marcus. They hadn't seen each other in years. "Man," Marcus said, "you aged like a fine bourbon. You're the guy people want to be when they hit 50. Jackson shrugged, still adjusting to these compliments. "I just stopped caring what people thought, and started focusing on living well." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. That's what makes you stand out. You know who you are." Back at home, Jackson sat down at his desk and began journaling, a habit he'd picked up in recent years. He wasn't trying to document every detail of his life, but he wanted to make sense of this shift he was experiencing. The growing respect, the attention, the quiet authority. It all boiled down to something simple but profound. He had stopped chasing and started attracting. He wasn't competing with younger men. He was walking a different path altogether. His appeal wasn't based on looks alone, though he had maintained a healthy physique. It came from the way he stood tall in his values, how he treated people with respect, how he didn't flinch under pressure, and how he had nothing to prove. He had already lived through mistakes, heartbreak, business losses, and personal growth. And now, in his 50s, he carried the essence of those lessons in his every move. Rachel once said, "You make me feel safe, not just physically but emotionally. Like I can be myself." That, to Jackson, was the greatest compliment. In a world obsessed with perfection, he had found peace in authenticity, and people sensed that. He also began mentoring at a local community center, sharing business and life lessons with young men trying to find their way. He told them, "There's strength in not needing to be loud, power in restraint, and confidence in knowing your worth even if no one claps for you." The younger guys respected him. They asked questions. Some even mimicked his posture or dress style. One of them said, "You're like the kind of guy I want to be when I grow older. Not just successful but balanced." Jackson laughed. Balance comes with falling enough times to learn how to walk steady. As the months passed, Jackson and Rachel's relationship deepened. They shared weekend trips to small towns, evenings with wine and jazz, and countless conversations that stretched into the early hours. She often told him that his maturity wasn't boring. It was exciting. It's rare to find someone who listens without trying to fix everything, who can lead without pushing. Jackson realized something important. Being an attractive older man wasn't about trying to be young again. It was about embracing the richness of maturity. The emotional intelligence, the patience, the ability to read a room without needing to be the loudest voice in it. He didn't have to chase validation. His calm energy drew the right people in. On his 53rd birthday, Rachel gifted him a custom-made watch engraved with the words, "Timeless isn't about age, it's about presence." That night, as he stood on the balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline, Jackson thought about all the phases of life he